The first night of 2026 in a Russian village began quietly, almost deceptively so, as if the world had decided to hold its breath. I arrived just before dusk, when the sky was already fading from pale winter blue into a bruised violet, and the last line of the sun lay thin and cold along the horizon. The road that brought me here was barely a road at all, more a memory of one, compressed by years of snow, thaw, and neglect. My car stopped at the edge of the village because it could go no farther. From there, everything had to be done on foot. Snow lay thick, but not clean. It carried the gray of old winters, the ash of chimneys long gone cold, the faint tracks of animals that still remembered this place better than people did. The village announced itself not with signs or lights, but with silence. Houses stood in uneven rows, wooden and tired, their windows dark, their roofs sagging under the weight of years. Some leaned toward each other as if sharing secrets, others pulled away, offended by time itself. I had chosen this place deliberately. I wanted the new year to arrive without noise, without crowds, without fireworks tearing the sky open. I wanted to feel the turning of time the way people once did, slowly, privately, with nothing but breath and thought. What I did not expect was how deeply the village would answer that desire, nor how much it would take from me in return. As I walked between the houses, my boots sank into snow that squeaked sharply with every step. The sound seemed too loud, almost disrespectful, and I found myself slowing down, as if the village might be listening. There was no wind. The trees at the edge of the settlement stood frozen in rigid attention, their bare branches clawing at the sky. Somewhere far away, a dog barked once and then fell silent, as though it had remembered something and decided not to say it out loud. I had arranged to stay in an old house at the far end of the village. It belonged to a man who now lived in the city, though he had been born here and still spoke of this place as if it were a living relative. He had handed me the key without many words, only saying that the stove worked and that I should not be surprised if I heard things at night. When I asked what he meant, he shrugged and smiled in a way that suggested both humor and warning. The house revealed itself slowly as I approached. A low wooden structure, darkened by age, with a small porch and steps worn smooth by decades of boots. The door creaked when I pushed it open, the sound sharp in the stillness, and then I was inside. The air smelled of dust, old wood, and something faintly sweet, like dried herbs forgotten in a corner. I closed the door behind me and stood for a moment, listening. Nothing moved. The silence inside was thicker than outside, padded by walls that had absorbed countless conversations, arguments, songs, and prayers. I set down my bag and began the practical rituals of settling in, lighting the stove, arranging my food, laying out a place to sleep. The stove accepted the fire reluctantly at first, then with growing enthusiasm, until the room filled with the low crackle of burning wood. Heat crept outward, slow and comforting, and with it came the illusion of safety. As evening deepened, the village seemed to retreat even further into itself. Darkness here was not softened by streetlights or the glow of windows. It arrived whole and unquestioned, pressing against the glass, pooling in corners. I lit a single lamp, and its yellow light carved a small island out of the night. Beyond it, the room dissolved into shadow. I ate simply, standing by the stove, and then sat at the small table, writing notes about the place, about how it felt to be here. Time passed strangely, without the usual markers. Minutes stretched and folded in on themselves. When I finally checked my watch, it was already close to midnight. I stepped outside just before the new year. The cold hit me like a physical force, sharp and immediate, stealing my breath. The sky above the village was vast and brutally clear, the stars so bright they seemed close enough to touch. There were no fireworks, no distant booms, only the quiet ticking of time. When midnight came, it did so without announcement. One moment it was still the old year, the next it was not, and nothing in the village changed to mark the difference. I stood there, listening, waiting for something, anything, to happen. Instead, what I felt was a subtle shift, like the ground settling after a long strain. The silence took on a different quality. It was no longer empty. It was expectant. I do not know how long I stood there before I noticed the light. It was faint at first, a pale glow somewhere between two houses down the road. At first I thought it was a trick of my eyes, a reflection of starlight on snow. But then it moved, slowly, deliberately, as if someone were carrying a lantern. The rational part of my mind immediately began to assemble explanations. Another visitor, a local returning home, yet something about the way the light moved felt wrong. It did not sway as a lantern would. It glided, steady and level, and it made no sound. I followed it. My footsteps felt intrusive again, loud in the stillness. The light drew me deeper into the village, past houses whose doors hung open, past windows that reflected nothing. As I walked, I became aware of other sensations. The air felt heavier. The cold pressed closer to my skin. The smell of smoke, faint but unmistakable, drifted through the air, though I could see no chimney working. The light stopped near the old well at the center of the village. This well had once been the heart of daily life here, a place of gathering and routine. Now it was capped with a warped wooden lid, its rope long since rotted away. The light hovered above it, casting a soft circle on the snow. I stopped a few steps away, suddenly uncertain. Every instinct told me to turn back, to retreat to the warmth of the house and the safety of reason. Instead, I found myself stepping closer, drawn by a curiosity that felt older than thought. The light dimmed, then brightened again, and in that moment, the village changed. It was not a dramatic transformation. There was no flash, no sound. But when I looked around, I realized that the houses were no longer empty. Soft light glowed in windows that had been dark moments before. Shadows moved behind curtains. The air filled with sounds, quiet voices, the clink of dishes, the distant laughter of children. The smell of smoke grew stronger, layered now with the scent of bread and something savory simmering on a stove. I stood frozen, my mind struggling to process what my senses were telling me. The village was alive. People began to appear, stepping out of houses, gathering near the well. They were dressed simply, in clothes that looked worn but cared for. Their faces were lined, their expressions calm. They spoke to one another in low voices, exchanging greetings, as if this were the most ordinary thing in the world. No one seemed surprised to see me. A few glanced in my direction, their eyes curious but not alarmed. One older woman nodded at me, a gesture both welcoming and reserved, and then turned back to her conversation. I wanted to speak, to ask what was happening, but my voice felt trapped somewhere deep inside. I moved among them like a ghost, unseen or perhaps simply accepted. The realization came slowly, settling into my bones with a chill deeper than the cold. I was not witnessing a revival. I was witnessing a memory. These were not people returning. These were people who had never left. Time here had folded in on itself, and for this one night, the village remembered what it had been. As the gathering grew, someone began to sing. The song was old, its melody simple and haunting, and others joined in, their voices weaving together. I did not understand all the words, but the emotion carried easily. It was a song of endurance, of seasons passing, of loss and return. I felt tears on my face and did not remember when they had begun. The song ended, and the people began to drift back to their homes. Lights dimmed, voices faded. One by one, the village slipped back into stillness. The light above the well flickered, then vanished. I was alone again. The cold rushed back in, sharper than before. The houses were empty once more, their windows dark, their doors closed. The smells were gone, the sounds were gone, only the memory remained, heavy and undeniable. I stood there for a long time, afraid that if I moved, the last traces of what I had seen would disappear entirely. Eventually, I turned and walked back to my house, each step slow and deliberate, as if I were leaving a sacred place. Inside, the stove had burned low, but there was still warmth. I sat by it until morning, unable to sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the village as it had been, alive and breathing, held together by shared time. When dawn finally came, it did so reluctantly. The sky lightened, revealing the village as it had been the day before, empty, worn, silent. If not for the lingering smell of smoke in the air, I might have convinced myself that the night had been a dream. I left later that morning. As I walked away, I did not look back. Some things, I understood now, are not meant to be revisited too often. They survive by being remembered, not repeated. The first night of 2026 in that Russian village stayed with me. Not as a story to be told lightly, but as a quiet certainty that places remember, that time is less obedient than we believe, and that sometimes, if you arrive at the right moment and listen carefully enough, the past will open its eyes and look back at you.